I've always been a great believer in the Westminster system. That's the governing system the United Kingdom lives under, and so many of our friends around the Commonwealth, as we were talking about with Lawrence Fox. Unlike most other systems, in times of great stress through the last century, it has mostly held. But the 2 years of COVID have not done it great credit, and this degeneration reached its nadir a week ago in Ottawa in the decision of a hitherto ludicrous Bollywood bridesmaid to suspend Parliament and give himself power to freeze your bank account for donating $50 to anybody who opposes him, as we were just talking about with Lawrence. When Robert Mugabe carried on like this, the Commonwealth denounced him and eventually suspended Zimbabwe from membership. But when Justin Trudeau does it, oddly enough, everyone stays silent. In recent days, we've invited Canada's High Commissioner in London, that's Justin's pal, Ralph Goodale, the Commonwealth Secretary-General, Lady Scotland, and the Minister of State for the Commonwealth in Mr. Johnson's ministry to appear on the show, and all are, so far, very shrinking violets. As far as I count, internationally, only Donald Trump, plus a Euro MP from Romania and a backbench Tory at Westminster have condemned Trudeau. Also the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, who scoffs at Canada, quote, "Are these the people who like to give lessons to other countries about democracy?" That's rather well put, actually. In Canada, the national opposition, as noted, has been extremely muted, but provincial premiers are pushing back. Among them, Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, who joins me now. And it's great to have him on the show. I preferred the old name, Jason, the War Measures Act, because it seemed to me more honest about the action you were taking. But we have to call it the Emergencies Act these days. So let me ask you straight out, is there an emergency in Canada?
Well, no, there's no emergency that requires invoking, you're right, Mark, the successor legislation to the War Measures Act, which effectively was martial law. Viewers may know that, or you certainly know, that back in 1970, the War Measures Act was invoked by Prime Minister Trudeau's father to deal with some militant and violent Quebec separatists. It's broadly regarded as a great shame in our modern history and a huge overreach at that time, which is one of the reasons Canada developed its written Charter of Rights. This, I believe, is a clear violation of the principles of that charter. It is not called for. It's disproportionate. It's unnecessary. Look, I'm a law and order conservative, and I don't think any democratic government can tolerate indefinite blockades of critical infrastructure, of roads, of border crossings. We dealt with that here in Alberta effectively using ordinary powers. We don't need these extraordinary powers to deal with people parked illegally on a road.
Well, as you've mentioned, the Canadian Charter of Rights, which was Justin's father's gift to the country. I recall that when you were actually immigration minister, you stopped handing out the charter to new citizens, and if I recall correctly, started handing out Magna Carta, which is a rather older charter and not one cooked up by Justin's dad, because you wanted to remind new Canadian citizens that their freedoms, their liberties, have very deep roots that go back way further than 1982. A lot of Canadians seem stunned to find out that despite the words in the Charter, apparently one man can just send out a tweet announcing that all those liberties are suspended and he's now proclaimed an emergency. There's a little bit of a conflict between those two things there, isn't there?
I think there is, and the act itself requires that, in fact, to paraphrase, that no ordinary law can deal with an emergency situation. It contemplates widespread armed insurrection, a failure of the state, when really what we were dealing with was a few dozen trucks parked on downtown Ottawa streets, which could have been dealt with using using the regular rules of the road and regular policing. Here in Alberta, we had a situation where there was a 2-week intermittent blockade of our main border crossing with the United States. It was a real problem, causing some economic damage and inconvenience for lawful travelers and truckers. But our provincial police service here, which is the RCMP, dealt with that using their normal powers. They didn't have to resort to conscripting tow truck drivers using extraordinary legislation, and they didn't have to freeze people's bank accounts. So this is overstep. But to track it back, Mark, the immediate cause of all of this was the Prime Minister putting in place with President Biden a bilateral mandate for vaccination for truckers going across the border. You know full well we don't have full grocery stores in Canada without U.S. grocery imports. This was done just a few weeks ago as Omicron was on the decline. This was nothing but bad political theater. It was political science, not public health science, that led to that, which really triggered a series of events. And I think they've layered even more bad politics on top of a situation that they helped to create. And by the way, there's no doubt that some of the folks involved in these protests have extreme views, but I think many of them, most of them, frustrated Canadians who simply wanted to speak out against 2 years of damaging restrictions. And the Prime Minister effectively has called almost all of them Nazis. And this is it further inflamed an already combustible situation.
Well, you're now taking this to court to see if we can get a judge's ruling on this. You regard it as disproportionate, and you also say that if this is allowed to stand, I mean, you mentioned the business half a century back, but in fairness to Justin's dad, the UK Trade Commissioner in Montreal had just been kidnapped by Quebec separatists. There was actually a Quebec terrorist movement, not terribly impressive by the standards of others, but it nevertheless did exist. Here, the Prime Minister has compared ordinary truckers, Polish bakers who bring them donuts in the morning, and all kinds of other people. He's basically invoking this act by comparing them with terrorists. Are you confident that a judge will see it that way?
Well, as you said, our provincial government will be filing a court challenge to this federal invocation of the Emergencies Act. And I think there's a possibility that 1 or 2 other provinces will join us. I can say that 7 of the 10 Canadian provinces have spoken out against the invocation of the Emergencies Act, saying that it is not necessary, it's disproportionate, and it's unjustified, and that it creates a dangerous precedent. That is certainly our view. We don't think it meets the legal definition of invoking this extraordinary legislation. So we will be taking that to court, as are groups like the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. And I think if you just read the clear letter of the law, that the federal government will have a very hard time defending that this was absolutely necessary, that they could not restore order through normal legal means.
Are you disappointed, as many Canadian Conservatives seem to be, by the comparative silence of the official opposition in Ottawa? I know that one of the consequences, the first immediate consequences of the Canadian truckers was that the leader of the opposition got defenestrated, and so you've got an acting leader and all the rest of it. But they do seem to have gone along with things that seem very iffy, such as the suspension of Parliament on Friday.
Well, I'm not sure I entirely agree with you on that, Mark. I think the federal Conservative opposition has been very strongly opposed to the invocation of the Emergencies Act and to the Prime Minister's provocative language. But the real shocker here is Canada's Socialist Party, the NDP, New Democrat Party, which apparently will be voting in lockstep in favor of this extraordinary use of emergency powers. You'll recall back in 1970 with the FLQ crisis that then leader Tommy Douglas, who's kind of a folk hero in Canadian political history, said that this was like using a hammer to crush a peanut. And the NDP then were principled and consistent champions of civil liberties. And they've completely caved to Justin Trudeau, which is, I think, a shocking about turn for a party that used to be principled on these issues.
Well, we've talked about the other parties. Well, we haven't talked about the Bloc, actually. Oddly enough, from my chums, they're the separatist party in the Canadian Parliament, and they're always quite reliable on these things because their go-to is always, so the Anglos are doing this to those guys. If we let them get away with it, they will do it to us in 6 months' time, and that seems to be generally their approach on those kind of rights issues. But let me talk about the cabinet itself. Oh no, go on then. Yeah, go on. Respond to that.
Yeah, no. Look, obviously, I disagree with the Quebec separatists on the federation, but they are resolute defenders of the Canadian Constitution, which means a federation and respecting provincial jurisdiction. One of the other problems with the Emergencies Act is it clearly intrudes into provincial jurisdiction for ordinary law enforcement. And any Quebec government, federalist or separatist, would fight that to the end.
Okay, let me ask you what I was working up to there. You've sat in cabinets, and anybody who's been in healthy cabinets under our system of government knows there's a broad range of opinion. You know, Boris Johnson just now didn't get to make his statement until hours after he'd planned to because he had some difficulties getting cabinet to go along with him. So in that sense, that seems slightly healthier than Justin Trudeau's cabinet, where no one seems to disagree with him on this.
Yeah, I'm not sitting inside that cabinet, but your observation seems reasonable. I think that he helped to create the situation with the trucker vaccine mandate, which was completely unnecessary. By the way, Mark, we have currently tens of millions of people in North America with active COVID Omicron infections. The notion that a few thousand unvaccinated truckers who could be asked to take a rapid test, sitting in the isolation of their truck cabs, would constitute a public health menace is ridiculous on the face of it. This, again, and this happened when most of Canadian provinces and U.S. states lifting public health measures. This was done for one reason, I think, because the Prime Minister successfully campaigned against Conservatives on COVID policy in the last election. This was, again, political theater. He created the irritant and then added fuel to the fire with intemperate words about the protesters. And now, again, I think this is a theatrical response to all of that. This is hugely irresponsible. And I would have, again, I would have thought that after the FLQ crisis, the War Measures Act of 1970, that there would be some cooler heads around the Liberal government that would say, hold on, is this really a responsible path for us to go down?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the War Measures Act, World War I, big deal. World War II, big deal. The FLQ, the Quebec crisis 50 years ago, not something that ever needed this. But on the other hand, it looks like World War I by comparison with Justin Trudeau's invocation of the Emergencies Act. Now, I wish you the best of luck with this lawsuit, and we will certainly follow it because there are dark days ahead if the governing party gets away with this. It will do it again, and other parties will do it again, and other countries in the Commonwealth will start doing it too. And it will be a terrible precedent if allowed to stand. Thank you very much, Jason Kenney. It's always good to see you.